Now, about the bedroom tax, let me give you a little bit of history about social housing. When social council housing was originally established, it was housing for what you needed, not what you wanted. A single person would have been given a single room, and a family would have been given a family house. But now there's a policy for councils to give you houses which are larger than your needs, so they could claim the extra rent benefit. And a way they engineered this to enable them to get the extra rent benefits was to demolish a lot of their one bedroom housing stock. Now remember that they've demolished a lot of single bedroom housing stock. They now have lots of two bedroomed and extra bedroomed larger properties. Now the housing benefit that people claim for their properties under the bedroom tax, for every extra room that you have, you lose a percentage of your housing benefit, your housing welfare rent assistance. Now, single people are being put in two bedroom properties, which is good, and they aspire to a higher standard of living. Now we are being penalised for being in a house too large for us, which we did not ask for, we don't need, and we don't require, and there's no smaller houses for people to move to, because, remember, I said they've knocked them all down. So the government's objective in this was to encourage mobility and the better use of the local authorities' housing stock. It was to encourage mobility and choice. But there's no choice, because you have no smaller bedrooms to pick from or to move to, and there's no mobility because you can't move. In Dundee alone, of the few one bedroom houses that are available, there's between 700 and 1,200 people waiting up to 7 years for these houses. And if you go into a private landlord for private renting, the rent for a private one bedroom is more than for a council two bedroom per week. So this fallacy that the government are telling us, that this act will cause savings to be made. This act will be a saving on the housing benefit bill. Now, not only are they pumping money into discretionary funds, it's like 1.3 billion into Scotland, topping it up to 13, or is it 33 million, which is an excessive amount. They're pumping all this money into the discretionary payments and the welfare assistance for people claiming the discretionary payments. They have people that are able to move, they're claiming higher housing benefits, but so there's no saving being made there. So this fallacy that the government are robotically mantra, parrot fashion, that there's a choice and mobility and savings. That's a lie. It's unsupportable. There's no evidence for it, and the figures just don't add up. And not only is this persecuting vulnerable people on low incomes, with the no ability to move, people that are on low incomes are already struggling to make ends meet. They can't heat their houses, they can't feed themselves. There's like, you know, the levels of child poverty will increase because people cannot afford to feed their children now. You know, we're going to end up back in the days of like Dickens with means testing and back to workhouses and people having to move back into slums. And if they do that, there's going to be properties left empty that the local councils will not be getting a rent income on, so they will be losing money in there. Plus the fact that these empty properties, there will not be the housing benefit income on them, so the government are losing money on that. And if that sort of thing happens, it's like, where are these people that need these 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom properties? Now, I can't move into a 1-bedroom property because there's no 1-bedroom properties available. So I'm tying up this 2-bedroom property that somebody in a 3-bedroom could move into, and then the person in the 3-bedroom could let that up for somebody else. So there's a blockage in the pipeline with the housing here. So again, you're the false information of the mobility and choice. You know, like, people are stuck in houses that are too big for them because they can't move down, because there's no 1-bedroom houses. The government have failed to provide houses. Now, when this bill came in, the government knew that there was no smaller houses for people to move to, so they knew that people would be trapped and targeted and persecuted. They're victimised and persecuted. Now, they knew 13 years ago, when they stopped building council houses, that a problem will eventually arise in the future, that there will be a demand for housing stock. So it's about time that the government stopped having this tit for tat. You know, oh, it was Labour's fault because they didn't do anything in the 13 years that they were in power. Yeah, we've had that. We've had that since 1970. There's always been a case of, the Tories and Labour are always tit for tat. Oh, well, you didn't do anything, so never mind, bitching about what they didn't do. Why don't you do it and solve the problem? Pour money into the increased house building programme. We need to see houses being built now to take up the slack for the demand for houses that weren't built in the past 13 years. It's going to take at least 10 years just to take up the slack of the houses that weren't built in the past 13 years. We need houses to be built now that will provide for the changing demograph in the future. All this should have been covered by a government in the previous generations. The government has failed us in not providing houses. In the Second World War, we had lots of areas of Britain being bombed. Lots of houses and properties were demolished and lost off the housing stock. The government had to step in and start building social housing to provide housing for the people who had lost their house in the Blitz. Now, while they were building these houses, for families moving into a house again, didn't somebody think, in 10, 15 years time, there's kids in these houses that have grown up and possibly get married and want to move out and need houses of their own. They should have been continuing a housing building programme. In the 50s, the 40s and the 50s, there was no social housing. It took a while for the social housing to catch up and be provided. The government has a duty and a responsibility of care to provide basic services to people, and housing is one of the services that the previous government failed to do. And it's up to this government to step up to the mark and start building houses that are needed. It's not just a case of being tit for tat, oh you didn't do it, so but look at us, aren't we brilliant? You know, we're providing 1 or 2 houses. You need a nationwide building programme to start building houses that are needed now. Not only did the government introduce this bill knowing that people couldn't move, the government knew that they didn't have the houses available for people to move to. And they've introduced this, and they're now being told, not just by sort of like, you know, other MPs who have had all their constituents constantly writing to them, bitterly complaining about this persecution and about people on low incomes and vulnerable people. The government should have organised and established a feasibility programme to find out if this idea was workable, and to arrive at the conclusion that if it was workable, it was workable if these other steps were taken. What the government has done is just rushed in and imposed this bill without finding out the stats and the figures of the feasibility studies that it needed before they decided on introducing this act into Parliament. They are now doing their feasibility study while people are suffering because of the effect of this act. And not only do you need to write to your MP to tell them, like, they need to urge the government to abandon this persecution of people because this is a breach of human rights. You don't have your mobility and your choice that the government are telling you that you should have, you already have. It's like, Mr. Cameron, you're the one that's telling us that we can move to smaller houses. I want to know where these smaller houses are, Mr. Cameron. And I want to know how to move when I'm already on a low income. I can't afford to redecorate my new place. I can't afford to move to my new place. And I can't afford the rent on a private accommodation.